Hi, and welcome to this lecture on evolving digital communication and public trust. My name is Jonas Lefevere, and I'm Research Professor of Political Communication at the Brussels School of Governance. I do research and teach on a wide array of topics, including disinformation, political campaigning, and the connection between politics and the public at large. While it's widely known that digital communication has upended the media landscape in many Western democracies, it's often unclear how this has affected people's trust in politics and the media. So, today I will be talking about the way in which key evolutions in digital communication affect public trust in the media and politics. Western democracies face a number of challenges, one of which is declining trust. We know that trust in political institutions has remained low in the past decades. But in recent years, public trust in the media is also on the decline. This is problematic, as a free press is often a critical voice in society. Moreover, we know that trust in politics and the media are interconnected. So, declining trust in the media also has consequences for the trust that people place in their political representatives. I will discuss how and why this shift to digital communication is a key driver of low public trust. In particular, I will discuss the fact that the shift to digital communication has fragmented both the outlets and the audiences of news. This affects trust in a number of ways. For example, individualized media diets mean that people can easily tune out of political news altogether. And we know that the less people know about politics, the less trusting they are. Similarly, disinformation spreads easily on online platforms, which decreases public trust in the trustworthiness of information itself. This credibility crisis quickly spreads to news outlets that have traditionally enjoyed robust reputations, but are now under attack, even being called fake news themselves. As I will discuss in this lecture, these trends can be highly problematic for society and the functioning of representative democracy. A well-functioning democracy requires public trust in politics and the press. So, the current trend of declining trust in the press may ultimately also cause a decline in political trust, which has always been quite low. These trends are also particularly worrisome for EU politics, which has long struggled with issues of legitimacy. In a highly competitive media landscape, political communication often loses out to other, more entertaining content. This threatens to further decrease the visibility of and the public's trust in the EU. Let's get started with discussing the nature of trust. Although there is discussion on the precise definition of political trust, it generally refers to whether citizens trust that political actors, such as parties and politicians, but also institutions, act in the interest of the citizens. In other words, do citizens trust that politics will act with integrity and competence to serve the interests of the public? Political trust has tended to be quite low, with citizens in many Western democracies expressing low trust in especially political actors. Moreover, in several countries, political trust has further declined in the past decades. The most recent Eurobarometer survey from April 2021 shows that only about 1 in 3 EU citizens trust their national governments. While low political trust may seem problematic, it does not need to be. In general, having a public that has a healthy level of distrust may actually be a good thing. It means that citizens do not simply trust politics to do the right thing, but instead keep vigilant of what politics does, ready to punish those parties and politicians that do not deliver once the elections roll around. Yet, we do need a basic level of political trust for democracy to work. It's widely accepted that if politicians are distrusted, they do not have the required legitimacy to govern. More generally, if the public does not have trust in the political system as a whole, this presents a threat to the durability and resiliency of representative democracy. The recent examples where US citizens distrust the outcome of presidential elections are a grim reminder of why such political trust is so important. Trust in the media refers to the willingness of the audience to accept news content based on the expectation that the media will perform in a satisfactory manner. In other words, do people trust the press to give them correct information? The signals here are worrisome. A comparative study based on the World Values Study finds that although trust in the media has not declined universally, it is on the decline in many countries. Why should we care about trust in the media? Well, first, a well-functioning press is the cornerstone of a well-functioning democracy. Politics is mediated, and what the public knows about politics, it knows through the media. So, declining media trust implies that people do not trust their main source of political information. Moreover, if trust in the media declines, it weakens the position of the press in society. In particular, media are an important counterbalance to politics, as it keeps politicians accountable. We already see that politicians have become more audacious in their attacks on the press. When Trump attacks CNN as fake news, he can do so because he knows a good portion of the public does not trust the medium. Most important, however, is that research shows a strong correlation between trust in politics and the media, what is called the trust nexus. People that tend to trust politics also trust the press, and vice versa. For example, media trust is often affected by the political context. In countries with high levels of political polarization, media trust tends to be lower. Conversely, academics often point to the media as a reason why political trust is on the decline. Political media coverage tends to focus on the negative, what is wrong in current policy, and on the political games being played. This type of coverage can contribute to people's perception that politicians lack integrity and competence. In other words, this type of coverage can breed distrust. This brings us to the key message of the lecture. Because trust in politics and the media are interconnected, shifts in the media landscape, such as the shift to digital communication, can cause further declines in trust levels. Digital communication has led to fragmentation of news outlets and audiences. The rise of digital communication has led to a rapid proliferation of news outlets. Print and television media have seen their competition grow exponentially. They maintain an online presence themselves, but the online context now hosts a wide array of online-only news outlets, blogs, podcasts, and social media platforms that all enable citizens to obtain political information. This in itself has put journalists of so-called legacy media, print and broadcast media, on the defensive. They have seen their audience deflect to other outlets and now find themselves struggling to maintain their place in a packed media landscape. On the part of audiences as well, a lot has changed. Whereas newspapers and television news broadcasts provided a predetermined package of news, digital news outlets enable citizens to opt for on-demand, algorithmically determined news content that caters to their interests and values. I will discuss 3 ways in which this digital context has begun to eat away at citizens' trust in politics and the media. A first trend is that research suggests that some citizens are tuning out of politics. What this means is that some citizens' media diets are almost completely devoid of political news. Online news allows citizens to pick and choose topics of interest, and social media, such as Facebook, curate which content citizens are exposed to through their feeds. What this means is that digital communication has the potential to increase the information gap between those that are highly informed about politics and those that are ignorant and lack information. What's worrisome about this is that it is hard to trust what one does not know. If citizens are ignorant about politics, why would they trust it? They do not know who is in charge nor what they do. So for part of the public, the spread of personalized digital news threatens to cause a lack of understanding of, and consequently trust in, politics. The number of available media channels has created a greater supply of partisan media that cater to audiences' political beliefs. Researchers fear that this may lead to a balkanization of the public sphere, in which there is no longer a common public debate, but rather isolated bubbles of like-minded news consumers that are consuming one-sided information catering to their preferences and beliefs. This us versus them dynamic undermines trust in 2 ways. First, media trust is affected. Citizens are less prone to trust partisan media outlets that cater to opposing ideological convictions, further retreating into their trusted, but biased, network of sources. Second, this distrust is likely to spread to mainstream media outlets. Such outlets provide more balanced reporting, but are easy targets for attacks from partisan news outlets and the extremes of the political spectrum. In this regard, fake news has taken on a dual meaning. One use of the term refers to disinformation, but the other use refers to an attack on a news outlet as being biased in some way, in an effort to undermine public trust in the medium. Finally, the issue of disinformation in online media is widely known. As the prevalence of disinformation online has increased, people become more distrusting of media content. Bennett and Livingston link the spread of disinformation to a breakdown in trust. As politics in media and politics broke down, citizens felt freer to consult other news outlets for information. This starts off a potential spiral of distrust. Recent work in Germany demonstrates that distrusting citizens are more likely to believe disinformation. In turn, disinformation further eats away at their trust of media content in general, perpetuating the cycle of distrust. So, declining trust opens the door for information, and in turn, disinformation further breaks down trust in politics and the mainstream media. Although economic incentives play a key role in the production of disinformation, Bennett and Livingston point to politics as a factor as well. The growing radicalization and polarization of politics fuels distrust of media that favor balanced reporting, and radical politicians regularly attack media themselves as fake news. Ironically, political attacks on the media may ultimately backfire, because as I discussed earlier, citizens' trust in politics and the media tend to correlate. So if citizens' appreciation of media takes a dive, so may their perception and trust of politics. These trends are particularly problematic for EU politics. Because it operates at such a large scale, EU governance has always struggled with the legitimacy issue. Simply put, the public did not know what the EU did, and the growing politicization of the EU has resulted in growing distrust of the EU. The good news is that the EU has responded with efforts to increase transparency of its achievements. For example, it has launched large-scale initiatives to combat negative trends associated with the shift to digital communication, such as the fight against disinformation online. Although traditionally trust in the EU has been low, since the beginning of the pandemic, the EU has enjoyed historically high levels of trust, with about half of European citizens expressing trust in the EU, according to the latest Eurobarometer. So despite the challenges posed by the shift to digital communication, the EU seems surprisingly resilient. Of course, it remains to be seen to what extent this high level of trust can be maintained once the health crisis subsides. The EU currently enjoys high visibility, as it plays a key role in the distribution of vaccines, and more recently the EU vaccination passport. As I discussed earlier, people trust what they understand, and currently there is plenty of information on EU policy regarding COVID-19. Yet, the media tend to focus on the national level first and foremost, so it remains to be seen what happens to EU trust in the future. It's quite likely that once media once again turn their focus to national politics, causing the EU to fade into the background, this will have a negative effect on EU trust. Let's wrap up the lecture with a few key takeaways. First, I explained that digital communication has fragmented the supply and demand of news content. The advent of online news has caused a rapid proliferation of news outlets. In this new landscape, partisan news outlets have begun to expand their reach as well. Audiences have also fragmented. There is no longer a mass audience. Rather, people are more free than ever before to choose the news content they consume. I focused on the potential threats this shift might have on trust in politics and the media. In particular, I discussed how personalized media consumption threatens to create citizens that do not know much about politics, and therefore distrust it. there is a real risk that digital communication widens the gaps between the haves and the have-nots of political information, and in doing so leads part of the public to become distrusting of politics. Second, digital news contexts are conducive to partisan news outlets that cater to citizens' preferences and political beliefs. The existence of filter bubbles in which citizens consume like-minded news and isolate themselves from dissenting opinions threatens to break down trust in politics and the media. Third, disinformation spreads rapidly online and constitutes a twofold attack on trust. It directly undermines trust in political information by casting doubt on what is true and what is not. Further, the credibility crisis it causes can contaminate even news outlets that enjoy traditionally high trust. Once distrust sets in, people become more open to disinformation, which further eats away at citizens' trust. So, what can be done about these issues? First, although legacy media such as print and broadcast services are typically seen as old-fashioned, they may have an important role to play here. Comparative research shows that even in recent years, media systems with strong public broadcasters maintain comparatively higher levels of political knowledge. While their direct reach may have declined by putting political news high on the news agenda, they provide an impetus to other news outlets to follow suit. Consequently, even though citizens can opt to tune out, some political information is likely to get through. Second, media literacy can help young citizens navigate the complex media landscape they are facing. Experimental evidence demonstrates that media literacy education reduces the persuasiveness of disinformation, which gives hope that such initiatives may curb the negative trends outlined in this lecture. Finally, although I have emphasized potential threats to trust emanating from the shift to digital communication, the potential benefits should not be ignored. While the relative prevalence of political information has declined, in absolute terms there is an abundance of political news that is more easily accessible than ever before. So, while digital communication does present a substantial challenge to political and media trust, there remain plenty of opportunities as well. This concludes my lecture on digital communication and trust. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out via email. Thanks for watching.